Zero.
Just give me a thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you. That's my daily. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. We have Steve Potts from IBHS today giving us a presentation on some of the research that they do. And so let's go ahead and start off with introductions.
Morning, I'm David Mormon with American Red Cross.
Good morning, Heather Miller with the Oregon State Fire Marshal.
Claudia Mike McDonald, Rim Rock West.
I'm Kyle Collins, Deschutes County Planning.
Megan Palmerton, Central Oregon Tree Experts.
Patty Air, Deschutes County Commissioner.
Greg Bryant, Schutzboro Woods.
Ben Moriarty, County Forester.
Tony Fryer, Sisters Camp Sherman.
Joe Fuller, Sisters Camp Sherman Fire.
Sherry Mullen, Witchy Creek Homeowners, Flowerwise.
Brent Heiner, Deschutes County Fire Deputy Coordinator. If you're joining us on Zoom, can you please do your introduction in the chat for me? Then having a lot of people not doing their introduction makes it harder for me to do my minutes. So if you please do your introduction on that, that's great. And then Kevin has a couple of announcements for us.
Yeah, let's see, for the fire fuels grant for the 24 application, right now we had 42 applicants. 41 of those we deemed eligible for awards. We're going through the final review today. And once we've done the final review, we'll send it to the commissioners to allow them a chance to review it. And then once that's been completed, we will announce awards. So tentatively, we'll announce awards for that grant at the end of this week. So let me know if you have any questions on that. And then our grants coordinator positions moving along. We have interviews scheduled for November 7th and 8th. So we look forward to that. I think we'll have a few good candidates to interview. And that's what I have for updates.
And then another update, we are moving along on finishing out the Upper Deschutes River CWPP, and we have our final meeting on November 4th at 10 a.m. Meeting's gonna be at the road department, so if anyone wants to join, what?
She just walked in.
Oh. If anyone wants to join that meeting, needs more details, you can go ahead and send me an email or call me and ask me about it. I can get you the details. And we're also having our second meeting for the East-West Bend CWPP that is on November 25th at 10 a.m. also at the road department. So same thing if you are interested in joining us for that. Please just let me know and I'll get you the information. And I think that, did anyone have any questions on announcements? The board. Yeah. All right, and I believe Steve is joining us online. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning.
All right, so if you are ready, I will let you take over and start your presentation.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me share my screen. And more importantly, can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
I got a thumbs up. So, okay, great. Let me do a little housekeeping here for a second. So good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Hawks, Senior Director for Wildfire at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or more commonly referred to as IBHS. My background is in the California Fire Service. I worked for California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, or CAL FIRE, for 30 years before I retired, and then joined IBHS. But at CAL FIRE, I spent the first 24 years of my career in the field, from firefighter to battalion chief, responding to wildfires and emergencies of all types. across the state, and even once went to Idaho as part of a strike team for lightning fires. And then the last 6 years plus of my career, I transitioned to working under the Office of the State Fire Marshal within CAL FIRE and within the Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation Division, which is where I was at the time of my retirement as Assistant Deputy Director, managing all the programs related to community and parcel level preparedness and mitigation for the state. And at IBHS, I touch all things that we do related to wildfire, from our research to post-fire analysis. Most recently, we were in Lahaina last November, where we conducted a post-fire analysis on the Lahaina fire. And I help with the Wildfire Prepared Home program, which I'll touch along in this PowerPoint presentation. And then the other things that we touched along the wildfire space. So if you're not familiar with IBHS, we are a nonprofit organization that is funded by the insurance and reinsurance industry. And the picture you see in the background of this slide is an overhead shot of our research center located near Richburg, South Carolina. And that big structure that's in the center there that has those circles on the front face of it, those circles are 105 fans that are 6 feet in diameter. And collectively, they can blow up to 135-mile-an-hour wind through that big concrete structure that's behind it. And in the center of that concrete structure is a big turntable, and we can construct a full-size, about a 1,600 square foot home, place it on that turntable, start the fans, and then turn the fans up to any wind speed we want to achieve, and then conduct the test on the 4 different perils that we research, which is wind, wind-driven rain, hail, and of course wildfire. And for wildfire, in that test chamber there, we have a trench with pots, and we burn mulch and wooden dowels. And then the embers that are produced by that burning material get lofted up through fans up into these stacks, and then the wind from the fans catches those embers and casts them onto the structure. And so we can evaluate the structure exposure from embers as a system of the components, not just testing one component at a time. And on the backside of that building, we conduct structure-to-structure fire spread experiments, where we're looking at spacing and other things, which I'll touch on more in my presentation. But we really look at the vulnerabilities of a home and businesses to wildfire, and then we address those vulnerabilities by what mitigation actions can homeowners, business owners take to reduce the risk to their property from these high-intensity wildfires. And you might think, from our name having insurance in it, and that we are funded by the insurance industry, that we may advise them on how to price risk, how to price a homeowner's policy, how to measure risk, things of that nature, but that is not the case. Our lane is purely in the research and determining vulnerabilities and what we can do to mitigate those vulnerabilities to a home. So we have been on a collision course with wildfire and entering into our built environment and leading to conflagrations for a long time now. When the factors of fuel, weather, and topography align, then that can lead to a very high intensity wildfire. And when that wildfire enters into a community, then that wildfire can become a conflagration. And the conflagration is the uncontrolled spread of a fire through a community, where structure-to-structure fire spread really is the significant component to the spread of the fire within that community. And at IBHS, that is what we really focus on, is reducing the path to and reducing the effects from these conflagration style fires. And we've really narrowed down to 3 things that we focus on that lead to a conflagration. And conflagrations tend to follow humans, drought, and wind. And we know that, humans or people lead to about 80+% of wildfire ignitions. And that as we continue to build out more wildfire prone areas, we put people out in harm's way, we put more homes out in those areas, exposing them to these high intensity wildfires. And which could lead to more home ignitions. Then drought. Drought at any scale, even a minor drought, can stress the fuel component, the native vegetation, to the point where it's very receptive to fire and rapid fire growth. And then wind. Wind, without a doubt, is the single biggest factor that influences extreme fire behavior. And I have a short video here taken from one of CAL FIRE's first in engine companies on the campfire back in 2018 that burned in and through the town of Paradise and virtually destroyed the town of Paradise. And I'll play the video. So you can see how significant the wind was on that day of the fire. And this was taken near the origin, near Polga, California. And the campfire burned a little over 7 miles in about an hour and a half to enter into the town of Paradise. And it was purely because of this wind component here, and also the very dry fuels that we had at that time of year, being November 8th. We had over 200 plus days of no appreciable rainfall. And so it really pushed that fire through ember cast out in front of it, starting new fires that then launched more embers out in front and started new fires. And the fire entered into the town of Paradise through ember cast, not the main fire front. So the main factors that I mentioned here about what leads to large fire growth is that the fire behavior triangle, what we know as the fire behavior triangle, the topography, the weather, and the fuels. And when those things align, those factors align like they did on the campfire, with no rainfall for over 200 days, very dry fuels, strong wind component, and steep, rugged terrain, that can allow for the fire to develop quickly into a high intensity fire. And when that fire reaches a community, it has the ability to become a conflagration. And so I'll go through a few example fires here. This one is a fire that was in Balch Springs, Texas, and a 35-acre fire. It was they were having some drought conditions. This fire was in July. They were under drought conditions. It was over 100-degree temperatures that day with 15 to 25 mile an hour wind. You can see the fire started on the right-hand side of the screen and is burning to the left. The fire is pretty much out at the top right flank and burning just slightly on the lower left flank. But continuous fuel of this grassland led right to the back of these wood fences in the back of these homes and ignited these wood fences. And then it's burning these sheds, wood fences, other urban fuels within those properties, and allowing the fire to get to these homes. You can see one home roof is on fire there. And then we have another home right here at the very end with a small fire right at that corner of the house. And it doesn't have to be a very large, high intensity fire. This was a 35-acre grass fire that had just enough continuous fuel to lead that fire right to the back of these homes, ignite these wood fences and all these urban fuels that allowed the fire to get to and destroy 9 of these homes and damage another 17 other homes within this community. As we go on to another example here in Lahaina, you see an off-duty firefighter from California had a home in Lahaina and was taking this video that you're seeing on the screen now. And he's walking along a dirt path or roadway that abutted, it was between the wildland, grassland area and the community of Lahaina on the north side of Lahaina. And you can see that very high intensity fire there as he pans back to the right. That is a vehicle that's burning. And this vehicle was parked on that dirt roadway right up against the grassland. So the grass fire ignited this vehicle, and then the flames from that vehicle were able to stretch directly across that dirt roadway and ignite fuels on the other side of that roadway, in addition to embers being pushed across the roadway, igniting other fires. And so you see when there's large combustibles that are in the path, they can be ignited, and then the flames that come off of those large combustibles, like a vehicle in this case, can be lowered to closer to the ground because of the wind speed, and then stretched because of the wind speed. And in this case, it stretched the fire across that dirt path and ignited combustible items within the community. And so there's that vehicle again that ignited first. And then what happened is there was a chain of events that occurred where the fire was ignited within the community, which ignited this small outbuilding, then this tree, then this house. And once this house got going, because of the short spacing between these two homes, this house on the south side was also ignited. And that started the chain of events that led to the conflagration in the north part of Lahaina. Onto Canada and the Fort McMurray fire, we see a very high intensity crown fire, timber fire burning on the left-hand side of the screen, but we have a good green belt and this roadway that's helping to stop that progression of the actual fire front from entering directly into the community. But as we play this video, you can see some embers landing or passing by this video camera that's on this vehicle as it travels to escape the path of the fire. But now look at the right-hand side, and we see some small fires igniting in the front yards of these homes. And in this particular location, it wasn't the main fire front that entered directly into the community. It was the fire was brought into the community because of the embers. And so that leads us to what we have adapted from the work of Jack Cohen, who you probably have heard of, a very well-known research scientist from the U.S. Forest Service, who's now retired, but still active in this space. And he coined this as the community conflagration scenario, where you have an ignition of a fire, and then that fire is burning where the fuel, weather, and topography align to allow for a high intensity wildfire to develop. When that fire enters into a built environment, it can start igniting very susceptible structures that are not resilient to the wildfire. And then during that time, the firefighting resources that are on scene are more focused on life safety, getting people out of harm's way, than on defending structures and putting the actual fire out. And while their focus remains on life safety, the fire continues to burn through the community, igniting additional structures, and that starts the development of that conflagration within the community. And then we see that unfold, unfortunately. So as we look to see what we can do about community wildfire resilience, we really look at the existing factors of a community that already is in place and has been for a number of years or decades. And we look at environmental conditions. So what's the fuel, weather, and topography that could lead to a high intensity wildfire in that area? The surrounding vegetation, both wildland vegetation that surrounds the community, as well as within the community, and then all the urban fuels that are within the community and at the parcel level. And then at the parcel level, we also look at characteristics of structure density. How close are the structures together, and what materials are they made out of? And once we have a good profile of what that community looks like, then we can begin to address the controllable factors. And really the biggest controllable factor that we have any measurable control over is the fuel component. And in a wildfire context, fuel is anything that can burn. So that's from natural and ornamental vegetation to homes, fences, cars, as we saw a number of boats in Lahaina that were burned that helped create pathways between homes. And then all the other stuff that people have on their parcels and within the community that can help the fire spread from one location to the next, from one home to the next. And so we look at things like creating good defensible space, home hardening, or making the home more resilient to withstand a high intensity fire. Fuel breaks around the community and within the community. We can also enact good building codes, which I know Oregon is working on a building code and a defensible space code. And then HOA CCNRs can go a long way to help a community be more wildfire resilient. And then grant programs. And I heard at the onset of this meeting talk about some grant programs. So I know that's occurring as well, which is good to hear because homeowners need a lot of help and assistance in doing their part to creating good defensible space and hardening their homes. So on to the built environment. Once the wildfire enters into a community, there's three main factors that control how easy it is for the fire to spread within the community and lead to a conflagration. That's structure density, or how close the structures are to each other, the materials that the structures are made out of, and the connectivity of fuels. So can a fire get from one home that's burning through connective fuels like a shed to a fence to a shed to the house on the other parcel next door, or other ways for that fire to travel to additional homes within the community? And so we go to the Marshall Fire in Colorado, and we saw this very high intensity fire in the grasslands. In this particular location, the grass fire ignited a wood fence that surrounds this home on Emerson Lane that is has the dot point on it, and ignited this home. And then we're going to see the progression of fire from structure to structure here in this next slide that has a video. But you can see the initial house, once the video starts, it's on fire, is this one that's in the darker orange color square. And then we're seeing this video taken from a doorbell camera across the street. And I'll go to that video and we'll play the video. You can see structure number one is fully involved. And note the time is 6:30 in the evening. Structure number two, there in the center, just to the right of that post on the front porch, is had just ignited, but now is becoming well involved. And you can see the wind shift. Initially, that structure and structure number three, which is just to the left of that pillar, was you could see really well, and then it became obscured with the smoke, and you could see embers really flowing down that street. And now the wind shifted back a different direction and allowed that to clear up. But as we begin to see that structure number two that's fully involved in this tree in the front yard ignite, those combine to ignite structure number three and get it going as well. And so if you look back to the far right now where the fire originally started, there's no longer a glow on what was structure number one. It has pretty much completely burned itself down. Structure number two is completely collapsed and is now a pile of burning material, and structure number three is fully involved. And that whole scenario took a little over 33 minutes to occur. If I go back to the previous slide, that progression of this fire going down this row of homes continued all the way until this T intersection here, where this setback of the home, this roadway, and the setback of the homes on the other side of the street broke that structure to structure spacing that was tight, and broke that ability for that fire to go from structure to structure in this particular location. And I'll go on to the next video, which is back to Lahaina. We started up here with this grass fire igniting this vehicle, igniting these homes. And then because of the tight spacing, it began to flow structure to structure through the three main mechanisms of fire spread, which is ember cast, direct flame contact, and radiant heat exposure. And as the fire spread to the south, we pick up another video from our off-duty firefighter. Again, the structure that's burning in this video that's casting all these embers that you'll see is in that darker orange square. And then it's another doorbell camera taking from across the street, looking at these two structures. And then as those structures ignited, they continued to spread the fire throughout that part of the community. So we're going to pick up this video here, and you see a large volume of embers being cast on these two structures downwind. And you'll note that it only takes one of these embers to land on or travel in or land on something in front of that structure to ignite it and lead to the loss of the structure. And also note here that we saw a wind shift. Those two homes across the street were completely in view, and now you can't see them any longer. And now we're going to see another wind shift here back at least 90 degrees the other direction. And we can see completely across the street, no embers are traveling onto those homes any longer. So that just underscores that, even though you may have a strong wind blowing in a constant direction, as that wind and the fire enters into the community, the wind really can become very variable throughout the community, even at a subparcel level, as the wind flows around varying objects within the community, like structures and other buildings and vegetation and so forth. So, and as that wind shifts back and forth, it can ignite buildings in one direction and then shifts and ignite buildings going in the other direction, and help, further the spread of the fire in that particular location. And we're going to pick up another video from our off-duty firefighter here. These are the house that you're seeing in the center of the screen is that house that was being showered by all those embers, that first house in line there. And I would have, if I just looked at the first video, assumed that house ignited because of the ember cast, but our off-duty firefighter said that wasn't the case. And as I start this video here, you'll note that here that the large body of fire on this structure is in the back corner of that structure. And this is the area from where, as he pans back, the structure was burning and the embers were being lofted from. But he said that this house ignited on the back corner because of this house burning to the right of it, and the connectivity of fuels from a wood fence and other combustible items allowed the fire to get to the back corner and ignite that back corner, which is consistent with the large body of fire being in the back corner of that house as to the starting point for this particular home. So from our research and post-fire analysis, we've come to find that embers are the leading cause of home ignitions, and I think everyone's probably heard that by now. But the other thing we need to note is that once a home ignites, there is greater than a 90% chance that it will be a complete loss. And when I was with CAL FIRE, one of the programs that I managed was the damage inspection program. And fortunately, California has amassed over a 57,000 structure database for damaged and destroyed structures since 2014. And we found from analyzing that data that this stat rings true, that once a home ignites, there is a very, very high likelihood that it will be a complete loss. The next category up is affected, which is cosmetic damage, like a broken window, blistered paint, maybe a little bit of burn on the outside of the structure, things like that. And that is around 4%. But once you start progressing in the amount of fire that was on the structure, there is very slim chance that the structure will be saved. And it's important to note here that firefighters do a tremendous job at defending structures and protecting communities. And when they are able to be at a structure and defend it, there is a very high likelihood that they will be successful at that. But once a structure ignites, and if it cannot be suppressed and it continues to burn, every structure then will generate more embers, more flames, and more radiant heat, and help with the progression of the fire through the community. So this turns to our parcel level discussion and looking at the property, its immediate surroundings, and the structure itself. And what do we do to help build more resilience to prevent our homes, our businesses from igniting in the first place. So we look at two different things. We look at the surrounding area out to 100 feet and trying to reduce the exposure from things that are combustible that surround the house that could ignite and allow for that connectivity of fuel or that fire to travel directly to the house and ignite it. And we do that by removing stuff from the property if at all possible. If we can't remove it, can we relocate it on the property so that if it ignites, it's not close within 30 feet of the home, close enough to ignite the home and allow it, and it can burn itself out without impacting the home, except for ember cast. Or if we can't relocate it, can we make it reduce its flammability by this wood fence in the front here that connects to the side of the house? Well, instead of having a wood fence, can we have a non-combustible alternative that attaches to the side of the house? Can we have an outbuilding that's built to the same standard as the house itself so that it withstands ignition from the fire in the first place? And then creating good defensible space, limbing up trees, spacing trees and plants out, not having anything combustible in the first 5 feet of the home. And I'll explain this more throughout the rest of the presentation. While we're doing what we can to reduce the exposure from items that surround the house, we're also looking to increase the resilience of the house, the components, the materials that those components are made out of. How can we make them more resilient? Because we can't completely, nor do we want to completely have, nothing flammable around our homes. And yet we know that those items can and will burn. So once they do catch fire and burn, how do we prevent them from then igniting the house? And that's through the building materials, from looking at the roof and all the components from the roof to the ground, and then trying to make them more resilient to a high intensity wildfire. And so that's what we're going to focus on here in the rest of the presentation, is looking at each of the components of the structure. What are the vulnerabilities from a wildfire, and what are the mitigation actions that we can take to reduce that vulnerability? And so the video that you're going to see here on the screen, it was taken from inside our test chamber in South Carolina. And you'll see that the ember generators are casting embers onto the structure. And so the roof is without a doubt the biggest vulnerability to a home when it is a non-Class A roof. So it is a structure that is high up off the ground, has complex geometry, and tends to harbor debris and embers through wind flow around the structure. And so it is without a doubt, as I mentioned, the biggest vulnerable component of the structure. And so the mitigation action here is to have a home that has a Class A roofing material or potentially Class A roof by assembly, and then maintain that roof clear of debris so that we don't have debris that is highly ignitable by embers once they do land on that debris and ignite it. We don't want to test even a Class A roof to that extent during a high intensity wildfire, although it is designed to hold up to that extent. But it only takes one vulnerability for the roof to succumb from a wildfire. On to gutters. So in that same video that you saw, it was looking at different components, the research that we conducted there. And so we're moving on to gutters, vinyl gutters versus metal. So we know that vinyl gutters are very vulnerable. They tend to melt easily and detach from the structure and drop to the ground. And when they have accumulation of debris within them that has ignited, now you're dropping flammable debris to the ground right at the base of the structure, potentially igniting the structure from the bottom. So the best course here, mitigation action, is to utilize non-combustible gutters and downspouts, and then put a gutter cover on top of the gutter to prevent an accumulation of debris within it. It doesn't mean though that debris can't still accumulate on top of the gutter cover. And so there still may be a maintenance issue there that needs to be mitigated, but at least it's not accumulating within the gutter itself and should be much easier to clear out. The other part of the roof here is that metal flashing that you see on the bottom right picture that's just below the roof material that's covering the roof assembly that's below that roof material and preventing any debris that does accumulate there, any embers that blow in and accumulate there from igniting that roofing material that's underneath the roof cover. So that's a key component, is we really need to protect that underlayment material from the roof as well as that fascia board from any ember exposure and direct flame contact from debris that builds up and catches fire. So eaves. This is an open eave design at the video at the top that you're going to take a look at here. And eaves are a shape that tends to allow for heat and fire to get up underneath them and build up and then ignite the eave area and then kind of traps that heat and fire and doesn't allow it to escape or go anywhere except laterally down the sides of the structure or through the eave blocking into the attic. And so the mitigation action for this is to enclose or soffit the eaves. And so back to that vulnerability, that the eaves, open eave design kind of creates a triangular shape here that's where the heat and fire gets trapped and tends to accumulate. And then that fire, once it develops underneath there, only has the ability to travel laterally. It does not, it cannot go up through the top of the roof yet until it burns its way through it. So that's where we get the flow of fire in through vents and through around the eave blocking there, and then laterally down the side of the house. So enclosing the eaves with a non-combustible material is the best mitigation action that we recommend. And then for the vents, ensure that the vents are furthest out towards the edge of the roof line as possible, as embers tend to flow up the side of the siding of the house and then arc out. And when the vent is closer to the wall, it's much easier for embers to flow in through that vent into the attic space than if they have to travel out and then make a complete 90-degree turn to travel in through the vent that is out closer to the edge of the eave. Onto vents. This video that we're showing you is from inside our research center in South Carolina, and you can see some embers flowing through the vent. You can also see some that are accumulating on the outside of the vent. They're too large to pass through that mesh screen. And so what happens with those embers is they either burn themselves completely out, or they burn themselves to a smaller diameter, in which point they can then pass through the mesh into the inside of the structure. And no matter what size of vent mesh you have, embers will travel in through that mesh and into the attic space. And but what our chief research scientist Steve Quarles found back at that time of the testing, because he spent a lot of time inside these attics, is that once the embers are forced through those vents, they just tend to lazily, like you see there in that video, flow into the attic space and don't tend to accumulate in any particular location or in any particular quantity. And at the size of when you have 1/8 inch mesh, the embers that pass through themselves do not have enough energy in them to ignite materials on the other side unless they accumulate in enough quantity to do that. And so that's why we recommend that, and it's what's in code, is to have a mesh that's between 1/16 and 1/8 inch in diameter. But we recommend the 1/8 inch because it has less likeliness to become clogged by painting or by debris that accumulates on the outside of the vent or whatever. Just make sure that that mesh material is non-corrosive and metal, non-combustible. And then the newer style vents are ember and flame resistant vents. Those go a step further by having a component on them, and it's up to the manufacturer of the vent to determine how they will comply with this particular provision of the test, that completely blocks the flow of flames in through that vent. And usually it's some sort of intumescence that heats up and closes off the vent and doesn't allow the flame then or embers to pass through. And then for other forced air vents like dryers or whole house vacuums, things of that nature, make sure that they have a louver or flapper so that when that particular item is in use, the flapper opens up, and when it stops being used, the flapper closes and completely closes off that vent. But when you have mesh vent for those particular items, they'll tend to accumulate lint and other things that are combustible, and they're usually much larger than a 1/8 inch, about at least a 1/4 inch in diameter mesh size, and so that would allow the embers to travel in through them with enough energy to ignite stuff on the inside. On to siding. So this video, we're conducting some research on structure-to-structure fire spread on the backside of our test chamber. And we're testing a large shed here where we had cribs inside, and we ignited the wood cribs. And then we turned the fans on in our test chamber and allowed the wind to flow out the back end of the test chamber and across these sheds. And we're looking at various things, and I have a slide on outbuildings here, which I'll go into coming up shortly. But in this video, we see that because of the short distance here, that this fire that's coming out of the shed that's burning, is you can see that the siding is beginning to smoke and off gas, and it's reaching its ignition temperature, and it will ignite. And so there's two vulnerabilities from siding when it's combustible, is that the first vulnerability is the biggest one, is that when it ignites, as you saw there, it leads for the rapid growth of vertical fire spread. So the fire travels up the wall and gets underneath the eaves, and then progresses laterally down the side of the house and into the attic space. And then it also, the fire can travel laterally on the wall, exposing other components like windows and doors. And so the siding isn't the biggest vulnerability in this scenario, other than being the mechanism that the fire was able to use to get onto the structure. But it's all those other components, the vents, the eaves, the windows, the doors, that are more vulnerable than the siding itself, that will fail prior to the siding failing and lead to the loss of the structure. Which leads to the second vulnerability of siding, is eventually the fire will burn its way through the siding directly into the occupancy space of the home. But by the time that happens, all these other components, the windows, doors, vents, and stuff have failed, and the home is a total loss. So the mitigation action for siding is having non-combustible siding there. I took this video that you're going to see at the top portion of the screen off of Instagram earlier, from a fire in Wapiti, Idaho earlier this year. So you may have seen this one. But it's a video camera of this fire that's impacting these cabins out in the woods. And another component of the siding that's vulnerable is that bottom 6 inches of the siding, where it meets the ground or meets up with the deck or something, where a horizontal and vertical surface comes together. It's that vertical surface, the first 6 inches of it, that is vulnerable to debris accumulating there, embers accumulating there. And if that surface is combustible, then it could ignite. As we saw, then once the fire is on the siding, then it allows for rapid growth of the fire on the structure. But you can see some small fires developing here on the deck. There's one, I think, here and here, that are from embers landing around this cabin. And as it transitions back, you can see some small fires burning really right up against the siding of that structure. And if even those small fires have the ability then to get to that siding and ignite it and lead to the loss of the structure if left unchecked. And so replacing that bottom 6 inches with a non-combustible material can really go a long way in protecting the structure from those small fires like that. And the pictures on the bottom I took while we were in Lahaina during our post-fire analysis, and you can see this corner of the structure in this blown up view of it, that there is soot staining from the fire, from embers landing in front of the structure here, igniting small fires, and then was able to stain the corner of this concrete foundation. But had this wood siding here extended all the way to the ground, there's a potential that this small fire could have ignited that siding and led to the loss of the structure. Unfortunately, because of that 6 inches of space here, it was not able to do that. And then this home survived the Lahaina fire. So windows, really when we think of windows, we think of the glass. And when you look at code and windows and what's required in code, it is only about the glass. The code generally requires 2 panes of glass with 1 pane being tempered. And it's really gone a long way in protecting that vulnerability of the window. We know that in regular annealed glass is more vulnerable and succumbs to the heat of a fire more easily than tempered glass, being 3 to 4 times more heat resistant than annealed. But we take it a step further with what we recommend for the mitigation action here is to have both panes be tempered, because Underwriters Laboratory Fire Safety Research Institute, or FSRI, has been conducting some research around windows. And they looked at 2 panes in different configurations, 2 panes where both were annealed, 2 panes where both were tempered, and then a scenario where you had 1 pane tempered and 1 annealed in the different configuration where the tempered was on the inside and then on the outside. And in all the tests that they ran, of course, the 2 panes annealed performed the worst. 2 panes tempered performed the best. And then when you get to the scenario where you have 1 pane's tempered, well, which one performed the best, when the tempered was on the inside or the outside pane? And they found that during their testing, in all test scenarios that they ran, when the tempered pane was on the outside, that eventually the tempered pane failed. And by the time the tempered pane failed, there was enough heat energy that passed through that tempered pane to cause the annealed pane to fail as well. So both panes failed, creating a big opening in the house. When you reverse that and put the tempered pane on the inside, then the annealed pane would always fail, but it would protect the tempered pane enough to allow the tempered pane to survive the fire. And in all scenarios that they ran, the tempered pane being on the inside always survived their tests. So if you have a scenario where you're just putting in 1 pane of tempered, make sure it's on the inner pane. But what we found from our testing is that there's more to windows, as you see a pane completely fall out intact from our structure-to-structure fire spread experiments. There's more to windows than just the glass itself. There's the assembly of the windows, and the material that it's made out of, and how the glass is held in place. And I'll show you another example in a video in a bit about the vulnerability to the frame itself. But here in this one, where you see the glass pane completely fall out intact and break on the ground, is there's small vinyl pieces that are really cosmetic, and they help hold the glass in place a little bit. It's more cosmetic for hiding the glue strip that's behind it. And once those melt and fall off the side of the window, then that glue strip has no protection any longer and heats up the glue, and the glue no longer holds the window in place, and the window completely falls out intact and breaks on the ground. So that's one of the vulnerabilities. The framing material itself, when it's vinyl, you'll see in one of our other videos coming up that it will also melt, create large voids in the side between the window frame and the framing on the house, that it could allow heat and fire and embers to enter into the house or completely fall out as well. So the best mitigation action here is to have multi-pane windows with at least 2 panes of tempered glass, and then do not use vinyl window frames or wood window frames. On to decks. So we did some research around decks, and there's 2 vulnerabilities to decks. One is from a fire starting underneath it, and then the other is for a fire starting on top of the deck. And of the 2, the fire starting underneath the deck is the most significant fire. And leads to large fire development and lateral spread of the fire underneath the deck and towards the home. And so I'll go ahead and start this video shortly, but in this video, we looked at, or this research that we conducted, we looked at the framing of the deck. So the top video is metal frame and metal posts with the wood walking surface. The bottom one is wood posts, wood framing with the same wood walking surface. And then we ignited fires underneath them. And you can see that the fire on the bottom, where it's all wood, led to a much higher intensity fire than the fire on the top, where it was just a wood walking surface. And so we really need to protect the underside of decks, storing nothing combustible underneath them, and then clear them out regularly from debris that accumulates underneath them. And so when you have a deck that is about 4 feet off the ground or less, then it's much harder for us to get underneath and clean out the deck from debris and other things that can accumulate underneath there. So that at that point, we recommend that you enclose these low elevation decks with metal mesh that's non-corrosive to prevent debris and embers from flowing underneath there and potentially igniting the deck from underneath. And then also create a non-combustible 5 feet that immediately surrounds the deck. Nothing flammable in that area, because if there's things there that burn, then those items can allow the fire to get up underneath the deck itself. And then if you're building a new deck, really look to build it with non-combustible materials. And so that leads us to kind of the defensible space component now, and those things that surround the structure that could potentially allow for the fire to get to the structure. And the first and most biggest related to defensible space is that first 5 feet that surrounds the structure. We found it to be just so critical in leading to the ignition of the structure. And so I'll play this video taken from inside our test chamber, showing different looks at ember casts occurring. And when you have combustible items within that first 5 feet, they can potentially ignite. And then those items, when they ignite, that fire on them then could potentially get to the house itself. And so that's why we say that first 5 feet is just so critical. Even a small fire has the ability potentially to get to that house and ignite it. So until we can conduct additional research, which we are working on, as well as others, around plant flammability, how easy is it for a plant to ignite, how much heat energy does it release when it ignites, how long does it burn, and look at those things, then that first 5 feet really needs to be non-combustible until we can determine that there is an allowance for things to be in that area that will not lead to the ignition of the home if they ignite. So the best course of action is to have a non-combustible zone, remove all vegetation, no overhanging tree limbs in that area, no mulch in particular, replace the wood fencing within 5 feet of the house, keep that area clear of any debris and sheds and other combustible items. And here's an example of this as a demonstration we conducted at our research center. And on the left, we have wood-sided home here with a vinyl framed window. And this is that other video I talked about earlier about the window. We'll take a look at this. This window is going to sag up here and then completely fall out. We have wood fence attached to the wood siding. We have wood mulch and plants within the first 5 feet. Over here on the right, we have non-combustible siding, a non-combustible metal fence within the 5 feet, and rock. So what we did is you can see the wires stretched in here. We put igniters into the mulch, turned on the igniters, which heated up and then ignited small fires in the mulch to simulate embers landing in the mulch and igniting small fires. And then we turned on our fans and then blew wind across this and then sped up this video for you. But you can see as the fire progresses to the right, once it hits all those non-combustible items, it dies out and does not progress to the side of the house. And if for some reason we didn't clear out the debris up against the side of the house, that non-combustible siding would help protect from that debris igniting. But on the left, you can see the wood mulch, the wood fence allowed the fire to get directly to that wood siding and ignite it. Now look at that window. In that window, that vinyl framing sagged, and then the window completely fell out. And once the window fell out, that allows the fire to get inside and the rapid development of the fire inside the house, leading to its loss. So I'm going to back this up and play it one more time. And as the fire progresses to the left and gets onto the side of the structure, watch that window. Watch this corner up here begin to pull away from the framing on the house, and then this upper portion begin to sag. And that's all happening not because of direct flame contact, just from radiant heat from this wood fence, the mulch, and the siding burning. And so now see it start to pull away and then sag and then fall out, and then we have the loss of the structure. So on to outbuildings. We have been conducting a lot of research around outbuildings. In this particular series of tests that we ran was around large sheds, and these sheds are 12 feet by 24 feet by 11 feet high. And we placed them at varying distances between the shed and the home that we had that we're exposing to the shed. We also looked at orientation of the home to the orientation of the shed. We looked at openings of the shed, doors and windows, and what that meant to fire spread. We also looked at the components of the structure, and we looked at, examined all these things. And as we know that structure to structure fire spread, as I mentioned early on in the presentation, is a significant contributing factor, whether it's home to home, shed to home, or ADU to home. A significant contributing factor to structure loss and conflagration that occurs within a community. And so from this, we determined so far that sheds should really be moved 30 feet from the home. And if they cannot be moved 30 feet from the home, then don't have them closer than 10 feet and apply the same mitigation standards as you do to the home to the shed. And that shed really needs to be prevented from igniting. So it needs to have its own 0 to 5 foot non-combustible clearance around it. Which leads us to the results of our research so far. And this is just on large sheds. So at 10 feet, when we put the shed 10 feet from the home, we always saw it was deterministic. We always saw the loss of or what was going to be the loss of the home. So at this distance, and it goes, we only tested in 10-foot increments, so 10 feet, 20 feet, somewhere between 10 and 20 feet, we began to see a difference in the level of damage at the structure. And so, you know, we don't know exactly what that distance is, but somewhere, I'll just say in the middle, around 15 feet and less, you know, we're seeing the total loss of the structure always. When you start to look at distances out to 30 plus feet, that's where we began to see different levels of damage. And the different orientation here of the shed at a 45 versus normal view is the orientation of the house to the shed. And so we saw damage from minor damage all the way up to one that was going to be a total loss. And so this is where the distance at which building materials really, really matter. If the building has the right materials on it, it has a much greater chance of survival. If the building is not resilient to the wildfire, it has a much greater chance of being destroyed. At distances greater than 40 feet was also deterministic. We didn't see any damage. But we know at this distance, because there's enough separation, we still need to account for ember mitigation and defensible space. Will go a long way in really defending the structure. But it's also important to note that we always need to account for embers because they're always present on wildfires and they travel long distances in the area. And when they're deposited out of the air, if they land on a combustible material, they have the potential to ignite it. So we always need to account for embers when we look at parcel level mitigation. And so we look at all of the research that we've done and the post-fire analysis, and we look at all these components of the structure and its immediate surroundings as a system of components that have to work together during these high intensity wildfires to give the home the best chance of survival. And when you have a weak link in the system, maybe you haven't mitigated all the vulnerable areas of the home, that weak link could lead to the loss of the house. So during these high intensity fires, you can't do just one or two mitigation actions and expect that you've appreciably reduced the risk to your home. You have to go the full distance. And that's what's led us to a program that we've developed called Wildfire Prepared Home. And it looks at the immediate surroundings of the home and the home itself and what actions can be taken to reduce the risk to a home. And it offers a certificate of designation for homeowners that have achieved that level of resilience and taken those measures. And so the items that you see in the brown boxes on the screen right now are what we call the base level designation. And we have two levels, a base and a plus. And the base level is really for retrofitting an existing home to getting into a more resilient state to withstand the exposure to embers. And so the items you see on the screen are really designed to protect a home from exposure to embers. And it doesn't mean that a home that exists can't be retrofitted to get to the next level plus, but is much more difficult because there are more stringent requirements, which leads me to the plus level designation, which is all of the things, the base level items and the additional items that you see in the blue box, which protects the home from embers, flames, and radiant heat, and addresses all the other vulnerable components of the windows, siding, and so forth that aren't addressed from the base level designation from embers. And it's much easier for a home that's building brand new to build to this level of resilience from the start, as opposed to a home that's existing and retrofitting to this level, but it can't be done. So to get a designation from IBHS for wildfire prepared home, and this program started out in June 2022 in California, and about a month or so ago, it is now in Oregon. So this program is now available to homeowners in Oregon to apply and seek this designation. And so the best thing that someone who's interested in achieving this designation is to go to our website, wildfireprepared.org, and download this How to Prepare Your Home for Evaluation guide or checklist, and then read through it and really read through it and understand it, because there are some stringent requirements and they are non-negotiable. So if you then walk around your house with this guide, and if you have some vulnerabilities, then the homeowner needs to address those vulnerabilities before they come back to our website and apply for submit an application to the program and upload some photographs. And we've had a lot of people in California apply that haven't done any mitigation work around their home and have a lot to do and it really bogs down the process. So we really need homeowners to, if they're going to apply to this program, they need to do a self-evaluation of their property and then mitigate the vulnerable areas and then apply to the program and upload some photographs where we can do an initial eligibility check. And then if they pass that initial eligibility check, then we'll schedule an evaluator to come out to the property to take photographs and gather the data that we need to do the final evaluation and determination of whether to issue the certificate of designation or not. And if they haven't met all the requirements, then we'll work with the homeowner to get to that spot where they have. Once they have, then we issue the designation, which you see a copy of down here. The designation identifies the person name, the location, address, and there's also an expiration date. This designation is good for 3 years. And at the 1 and 2 year anniversary mark, there is a landscape review process. We want to make sure that people, after they've received the initial designation, haven't put plants back in the first 5 feet of their within their house. So it's a homeowner driven process where they upload photographs and we evaluate them, and then the designation continues. At the end of the 3 year period, they would currently how the program is designed is they would need to reapply for the program to maintain that designation for another 3 years. And with that, that is the end of the presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can go to questions if there are any.
Anyone have any questions?
Oh, I just wanted to ask, what were the winds at Paradise that day? Because I remember on the documentary that people had already sent their children to school. How bad were the winds in Paradise? Because you said what, it took it 7.5 miles in just an hour and a half or something?
Correct. Yeah, the winds I think topped out at around 70 miles an hour out towards Polga where the fire started. I don't know that it reached that high in Paradise, but it only takes a wind around 25 to 35 mile an hour range to really, that's the range at which aircraft can no longer fly safely, and for the fire to get really to the point where it's not controllable by the firefighters.
Okay, I got a couple of questions. Large fires make their own wind, don't they?
They can, certainly, yes. That's a plume-driven fire. Yeah.
Okay. Other thing is, I've got some people that have like wood sheds within 5 to 10 feet of their house. Is there some way to mitigate that rather than them moving it?
Well, if you don't want to move it or don't have the ability to because of space or whatnot, then it's really, looking at the components of the shed, just as you look at the components of your house and what materials are they made out of and how can you retrofit the shed to make it more resilient to withstand the fire, because we don't want the shed to ignite. At that distance, it is very, very likely that if the shed ignites, it will ignite the house. And so the shed needs to be, the vulnerable areas of the shed needs to be mitigated, and particularly look at that first 5 feet around the shed, that embers and we don't want embers landing there, igniting small fires, getting to the shed, and we don't want an uncontrolled fire burning directly into that area, igniting the shed either.
Is there something like, is there a shield or something like that you can have between the house and the shed itself or not? Like a metal shield or something? No?
We have seen non-combustible fencing between homes, particularly in Lahaina. We saw clear evidence that fencing between homes that were spaced fairly close together helped provide some shielding effect to homes, but it is not an absolute. You can't put a shed or a fence, a non-combustible shield or whatever you want to call it between that and expect that if the shed ignites, that the home will not ignite, because the fire, you'd have to put the shield up very high to prevent the fire from licking over the top of the shield, getting to the house.
Yeah. Same thing about like wood decking up against the house. Is there something, we say, you might be able to put a metal shield between the decking and the house, but I don't know if that works or not.
So there's some mitigation actions for decks is to replace them with non-combustible walking surface. If that's not feasible, then look at that first 6 inches on the wall, making it non-combustible, and the first board or two that abuts up against the side of the wall, looking, can you replace that wood board with a non-combustible alternative? So that if the fire is on the deck, even a small fire can't burn directly to the house. If it's a larger fire on the deck, then having replaced 1 or 2 boards and that 6 inches isn't going to make a difference. But what we want to prevent is even that small fire from getting to the house.
So have you done any research, Trex decking versus wood?
We have not, but Trex decking and that type of composite material is much more dense material, so it is much harder to ignite. It's a little more ignition resistant than wood, except for when you get into the harder hardwoods like Ipe and others. They're more denser, so they're harder to ignite. But once they do ignite, they will burn. But as I go back to the stat that I mentioned from my time at CAL FIRE, when a home ignites, it's greater than 90% chance that it will be completely lost. So we need to prevent the ignition of these components in the first place. And so using like composite materials or harder hardwood materials is better, but still, once they do ignite, they will burn and lead to the loss of the house potentially.
So that in mind, we have a deck that is 20 feet off the ground, and it's Trex decking, but with everything that you're saying in mind, there is enough space underneath for the flames to get under, no matter if we keep our deck on top clear or not, and most likely being an attached deck to the house, that would then further easier ignition than without a raised deck. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Well, certainly having a deck there is more of a vulnerability than not, or having one that's non-combustible. But with that elevation, it's much easier. 20 feet off the ground, you can clear combustible items out from it. Underneath it, around the deck, you can control your vegetation and other stuff that you prevent that's combustible from being in that location, so that the wildfire cannot get up underneath the deck. And then look at the items on top, that first 6 inches up against the wall of the structure, where the deck and the wall meet, and the things that you place on the deck. Because wherever something touches the deck surface is a point where embers can accumulate. So look at those locations, and can you put a non-combustible, like furniture, have a non-combustible framed outdoor furniture versus a combustible framed one, and then put your cushions on top, and just move them if there's a wildfire in the area or a red flag warning day. But look to lessen the amount of fuel that you put on top of the deck as well.
Thank you.
One question here in the room. So common sense, tells you not to do a wooden deck, but so you were saying Ipe is a better choice because it's dense kind of wood?
It's denser, yeah. It's a hardwood. It's a much denser material.
So the best thing would probably be cement or pavers, which of course then means, you can't do that on the second level. So I guess it would be, again, common sense to put anything cement down on the first level.
Yeah, or certainly the deck would need to be engineered to be able to withstand that load of the concrete material on top of it. There are some lighter weight concrete materials that are out now. But to your point, yes, concrete or non-combustible, whatever material you use that's non-combustible is certainly better than combustible materials. But we know that there's a lot of wood decks out there, and there are ways to mitigate the wood decks than just completely removing them off the side of your house and replacing them.
Second thing, maybe I missed this, then what would be the best material for window framing? You had said fiberglass, no, but then I would suppose metal, but.
Metal's one of them, and also fiberglass is a second.
So fiberglass is okay.
It's much better than vinyl. Vinyl and wood.
So fiberglass clad wood is sort of a mixed bag.
Yeah, if it's clad over top of the wood, yes.
So something I don't hear about, and I'm new to all this fire physiology, but is, so what about your propane barbecue on your deck? I mean, where would you take that to be safer prior to a fire? As well as your propane tank, which is attached to your house.
Right, so the smaller tank that's on a barbecue, barbecues are generally more mobile, so you can move it inside your garage or house potentially, or move it further away from the house.
Or you could just take the tank itself.
Or you could take the tank off, and if the barbecue has a, combustible cover over top of it, you can remove that too. For larger tanks that are fixed, that are used for heating and cooking and whatnot, that the best course is, again, try and move it further away from the house, up to 30 feet if possible. If you can't do that, then really mitigate around the tank. The vulnerability from a propane tank is the gas heating up, the liquid heating up, creating gas, which overpressurizes the tank and then causes the relief valve to open up, exhausting the excess pressure, which will then ignite from the wildfire. And then if that's close to the house, that very large flame that comes out of the top of the tank could be bent over and ignite the house. So we need to protect the tank from heating to the point where the exhaust valve opens up. And so that's by removing stuff that's around the tank, creating good defensible space around it. So really nothing flammable within the first, in California, it's 10 feet. And then reducing the amount of fuel an additional 10 feet beyond that. So a total of 20 feet around it, so that the direct flame and radiant heat cannot heat that tank up enough to allow that pressure relief valve to open.
Steve, you didn't mention, when I lived in Southern California, I was always bringing my wood furniture inside whenever we were like in fire danger, and the cushions, and yes, I would
great
point
point.
it in and out quite often.
Yep. Unfortunately, in Southern California, yes. And that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. Is those combustible items that are, on your back porches, in your front entryway, that you have, or around the house, really look to, on red flag warning days, or if there's a fire that starts, make sure that you move them further away or bring them inside. But one point about that is, don't delay your evacuation to take these steps to mitigate the things around your house, because it may cause you to delay it to the point where it's too late and you can no longer evacuate safely. And your life is much more important than staying to, move items around your house and defend your house. So, and as I mentioned earlier, while people in harm's way, firefighters' main focus is on life safety, and they're going to focus on helping people evacuate and getting out of their homes safely. And so we don't want to see anyone get trapped by the fire like we have seen in Paradise on the campfire and in Lahaina, and succumb to the fire.
Mr. Hawks.
Yes.
Mr. Hawks, thank you so much for presenting today. Very, very good information.
You're welcome.
My question is, in California, a lot of research has been done that's helpful to many other areas. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm mistaken, California has gone through 2 different rounds of code upgrades. And some of the studies that I saw showed that when a community gets involved in a fire, that each of these different levels of mitigation has caused less spread and less loss in the community. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because in Oregon, I think that we're just trying to get something together for for round one of this type of mitigation?
Yeah, absolutely. So California has what's called the California Building Code Chapter 7A. It's the, if you're familiar with the ICC IWUI code, it's California's version of that. It is, in my opinion, the most stringent building code for building in wildfire prone areas in the nation. And it went into effect on July 1, 2008. So every 18 months, it can undergo updates to the code, and in which it, it has the original version of Chapter 7A had Class B roofing material was allowed. Now it's Class A roofing material as an example. It continues to evolve over time, and they have a standing working group that continues to work on the development of that code, as well as there's a separate code for defensible space. And all these things go hand in hand. It's not just one thing like retrofit your home with great building materials that's going to allow it to withstand a fire. It's retrofitting your home with great building materials, creating good defensible space, fuel breaks within and around the community, good, firefighting resources, and good response. There's many factors that go into a community's ability to withstand a fire, and each community is unique in where it sits in its attributes, and each fire is unique into where it burns and under the conditions that it is burning under, and whether it's going to be kind of a benign fire versus a high intensity wildfire. And so we found from my time at CAL FIRE in examining that damage inspection data, that homes that were built to the California Building Code Chapter 7A had a higher chance of survival. You might have also seen that in the McClatchy report come out, then they examined the CAL FIRE damage inspection data, and they put a number on the campfire, which you can certainly do, that I think it was like over 30% homes that were built to Chapter 7A had a greater than 30% survival rate than homes built before Chapter 7A. What we found in examining more than just the campfire is that Chapter 7A always made a difference. It was just hard to quantify because every community is unique, every fire is unique, and so you can't just put a blanket number on it. What we can say is that codes like building codes like Chapter 7A, defensible space, works. And when you do them together, they work even better than when you do them individually. And when you do them in mass across the community, then that really goes a much longer way at defending the community than just individual homes here and there. So I hope that answered the question. It's just hard to put a number on some of these things, but we do know that they do make a significant difference.
Okay, I have.
Thank you very much.
One more question. Sorry to cut it short, guys. We do need to leave a few minutes for roundtable. Ray, you had your hand up, so I'll let you have the last question.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It's really great. A couple quick questions. Vinyl clad aluminum windows, same classification as just vinyl windows?
They're going to withstand the desire or the of the vinyl window to shrink. So the aluminum is going to keep that rigidity. That is a much better scenario than just having a vinyl window by itself.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you. The other question is a lot of pine trees around here. I've noticed that the gutter coverings, the pine needles stick in there really nicely. They penetrate. Sometimes very difficult to get out. Is it better to just have no covering on there and go up and clean the gutters all the time? Or I'm worried that people think, well, the guttering cover protects me. Will pine needles stuck in the covering ignite, or not really high enough intensity to set the house on fire?
Yeah, so I think it's still better to have a cover, even though needles will stick in there. And then, like you said, it's still a maintenance requirement issue that in that photograph, when we were on the gutter slide, there's an area in there where debris can still accumulate on top of that gutter cover. So it's not a maintenance free necessarily thing, but I think it's still much easier to clean off the top of the gutter than to have to clean out the inside of the gutter. You still probably can't get all the needles out. The remnants that are stuck in the gutter cover can still ignite, but they're probably not going to create enough heat energy in them to ignite the building material underneath the roofing material. But really look at that space. You don't want exposed wood right in that area. If there is, then you can tuck in some metal flashing underneath the roofing cover to mitigate that exposed area.
And a really very unique question just for our situation, I think. We have an RV shed that's not walled, not finished. It's always been just framed out, has a roof with a Class A material. I know it's going to burn, but is it better just to take the whole thing away? Or is there enough heat energy being generated from that to ignite the house? It's within 10 feet of the house. So no siding, just framing and a roof, Class A roof.
I'd still say at 10 feet is probably too close. If you could move it further away, I know that's hard to do, but that would be ideal. You could also side it with non-combustible siding, which might go a long way at protecting it at that distance.
Yeah, it wouldn't do any good to do two sides of it or one side of it with non-combustible if the other side's open, right? Flames would just come right on in, embers would come right on in.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for the presentation.
You bet.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was an awesome presentation. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here, and Project Wildfire really appreciates it. I'm sorry to everyone who didn't get their questions answered. It was, a really informative presentation, so we did have to cut those short. I apologize for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And if there's other questions that people still have that they want to ask, Bryn, you have my email, so please, feel free to forward those on to me, and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Yes. All right. We'll do that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's do a quick roundtable, just quick updates, if anyone has anything.
Just from the fire prevention co-op that we're running our Fire Busters Fire and Life Safety program this week. It's the 38th annual that we've run, and on Friday we'll touch on defensible space and yard debris burning as one of the segments. So it runs on KTBC, or you can find it on KTBC's website. So pretty fun program for elementary school kids.
No,
No, I want to ask a question.
Just quick, the Shoot Soil and Water Conservation District is hosting an open house tonight at Worthy Brewing, 5 to 8.
You said tonight.
Tonight, yep.
Anything from the back? Okay. All right, well, thanks, everyone. Again, if you do have follow-up questions for that presentation, you can feel free to send them to us or to Steve directly, and we'll try to do this.
And I have the ones in the chat, so I will be able to forward those to Steve. Thanks, everyone.
See you.